So I was probably the worst thing you could be. I was a liberal. Um, bad joke.
Teeth
Right.
sucking around the
Yeah.
world. Yeah.
No. Yeah. Oh man, I don't even. It kind of happened so gradually. I'm not quite sure how I got to like where I'm currently at.
Hmm.
I think part of what made it easier for me to avoid the pipeline, because I do know there was a moment where perspective did shift, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I can spend time with the people I'm currently spending time with anymore.
Hmm.
But I'd always considered myself left, except my only friends were like ANCAP with some race realist stuff thrown in a lot. Um, so that was kind of rough to be around. I was always kind of the punching bag there, even though I didn't really argue against it. I just laughed because everything's jokes. And
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but how did I avoid? I think I think the perspective, right? I think constantly identifying as being left, regardless of how left I actually was. Looking back, I centrist at best, right? Um, it's tough, right?
Yeah.
It's because you're not like, okay, today I'm going to be more left than I was yesterday, right? Like it's not something I sat and thought about.
Right.
Um,
Would you like have you considered the idea of your political stances being determined more as like a social identity than as like a weighted like logical conclusion, or do you think that you were always like
until I started to actually like read and be less of a passive participant in that, then yes, I totally agree with that. It was being left was a social identity. Left, right, was
Yeah.
a social identity for me. It was I didn't have a whole lot of arguments or anything in my favor. It was just I vote Democrat, so I'm left, right? Like that's yeah, it was absolutely a social identity.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the case for a lot of United States of Americans, simply because the way that we're generally, in the mainstream, raised to think about politics, it's like very bi-party, very like you're in this kind of tribe or this tribe, and we're not really
Yeah,
encouraged to think outside. In fact, it's like very much discouraged to think outside of those boxes
right.
because it's like, oh, well, if you vote third party, you're voting like the only, yeah, like when I was younger, the only context I could think of for any kind of like external political paradigm would be like a third party situation. And then of
Sure,
course it's like, oh, you're throwing your vote away if you vote third party.
sure.
Nobody ever talked to me about like the other potential avenues for political change. So
I
I
think
think that's not too surprising.
I think a big part of it for me when I was younger was religion specifically.
Oh yeah.
I my first identity, like coming into your own like early teens, right, was being anti-religious, falling into the big push on YouTube there was over like atheist channels and
Yeah.
whatnot. And so I was deep into that, and so I saw the right just more than like economics and social issues. I was just, oh, that's the Christian party. Like, no, I can't. Fuck
Wow.
that, right? That's not. Which is surprising that I didn't fall into the alt right stuff because a lot of those atheist channels transition to uh, some pretty far right talking points.
Yeah. You dodged a
the
bullet.
the skeptic channels, right?
Yeah, I had the exact opposite. I was largely surrounded by Republican culture because of my Christianity when I was a child. So it's
right?
funny. We were kind of like we probably would have just freaking hated each other.
Yeah, probably. Yeah,
People like to think like the pipeline is a bad thing, but like
I think it's just a natural function of how a lot of these.
Yeah.
Sorry for cutting you off. It's just a natural function of how these places operate without it ever being intentionally set up.
Yeah. As it's just a natural kind of way of like, especially like the YouTube algorithm recommendation thing. It's kind of a natural way of how that system works. I mean, to like Nazis in the right wing, the alt-right pipeline's a good thing, right? So to us, the left pipeline is a good thing because it's moving people towards more.
And I
leftist
think there's
ideas and
strength
stuff.
in admitting that we have a pipeline because, like, the right is so fixated on denying they have a pipeline. But I think, it's just like I like to use the word propaganda for what I do on my YouTube channel because I'm just trying to be honest. Like, propaganda is persuasive communication. And, I don't think that should be like a dirty word. I think we should all understand how persuasive communication and propaganda function so that we can kind of like make wiser decisions about how we engage with it. What do you think are the most effective ways, and Faraday, listen up for the wisdom we're about to hear. What are the most effective ways to stop people from falling into that alt-right pipeline and pulling them into our leftist pipeline that we now admit that we have? Starting with Gutian.
I think probably the easiest way, because obviously it depends on the person. I think annoyingly, it's as much as annoying as that is to recognize, but like it's not gonna work. Not everything's gonna work for each person, kind of thing. Like you need to kind of like match it to each person, match it to how they kind of perceive or what they're sort of like invested in specifically. But I think like the easiest ways I've seen have been like with regards to trying to either target the alt-right on a lot of the very bold statements that they make, because they make very bold statements. So you go, okay, well, have you considered what's actually behind those bold statements? Because the easiest way of bringing down everything that like a right-wing person believes is to be like, hey, do you believe in historical nuance or historical context? And every person goes, well, yeah, obviously. I mean, history happened, right? It's like, yeah, okay. So do you think that could influence the way that things have happened now? And they go, well, I guess, yeah. And I'm like, okay, well then, do you recognize that the right-wing point is kind of ignoring all of history, basically, to make the statement that they're making right now? It's like, well, yeah, now you say that, it's like, well, okay, do you see how that might not be the best? Like, they're logically inconsistent, generally speaking, the right wing. So it's very easy to just be like, hey, look, this makes no sense if you like literally just like walk through it, like it just falls apart. That'd be the kind of easy way of doing it.
You're welcome on my server, Gutian.
Maybe we can make like an alt account. So
Yeah.
that sounds a lot like the Marxist idea of just pointing out contradictions in capitalism, which is a similar sort of strategy, I think, for combating this false narrative of the right. So I think that's powerful stuff, and it's got a pretty good track record of working in my experience. Beefacts, in addition to your response about the best way to de-radicalize the right and pull people to the left, I also demand Beefacts.
Okay, I'll give you the how to de-radicalize first.
Okay.
So I think there's several different ways to approach it. I think what I think the way Destiny does content is helpful, right? Because it's not necessarily doing what's it called, the dirtbag left, right, where you still make all the same jokes and say all the same gross language, but it's leftist stuff, right? It's doing the same style of debate, but with leftist like content, right? So it's dunking on people. It's shutting down concepts, because that's what people like when they go to watch Ben Shapiro. They want to watch somebody lose. They want to watch somebody just get destroyed, like every title of every YouTube video that he has. But then there's also like some people that doesn't work the same way. It has to be more like I'm not going to shit on you. I'm not going to hate you. I'm not going to whatever. But like here's how you're wrong. Here's the information on that. Like I'm sorry that you had a shitty family situation, but that I can show you like what caused that, and it's not like other ethnicities. Like, right. There's definitely different ways to do it, and I think it's a little bit more individualistic. I don't know if there can be one channel that's like, okay, here's the channel that can de-radicalize everybody.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a diversity of tactics, and that's why we need a diversity of actors, coming together and
absolutely, and
using various strategies and tactics, including the resourceful use of facts about bees.
There you go.
Which, I need those bee facts.
So, male bees only exist in the hive. They're called drones, right? They only exist in the hive to mate with the queen. Mm-hmm. They can only do it once, because when they do, their testicles explode and they die.
Monarchism.
This is yeah, right. Oh,
that was excrucihating and horrifying. But I now know much more about the life of bees.
And this is why I'm Volcel.
Yeah, there's all bees, all smart bees are Volcel. Yeah.
Galaxy brain. Yes, yes, yes. This is the time when we all put our YouTube, Twitch, leftist public careers on the line and risk mass cancellation as we all share our spiciest takes, the takes that are most likely to have us canceled.
Well, I can give you another take that I have that's even spicier that might actually make the chat really fucking angry.
Ooh.
Do it. Put some drama in here.
Okay, I think that BreadTube is bourgeois. I think that BreadTube is very white actually, because I think that BreadTube has a large margin of white people on there, and like most of the time when you look on the BreadTube subreddit, it's mostly white people playing video games and narrating video game content. And it's not a lot of people talking about organizing and using actual praxis and actually getting people to use praxis on the actual battlefield, like actual organizing, like using dual power structures and things like that. We're not actually doing that. I mean, American Johnson, you are one of the only big BreadTubers who actually talks about things like that,
Well, I mean, I do agree with you that, especially in terms of the diversity issue, we have some, there are projects now, I think, that are addressing that. So, for instance, in the chat, somebody was just talking about how Kamazats and a few other Latinx creators are going to be starting a show very similar to this, where it's going to be all Latinx people. And I think that Suck My Opinion is also doing a very similar thing with Black socialists. Is that Suck My Opinion or Jet Cloud? I think they're working on that together, perhaps.
All of those people are great. All of those people are great. Yes.
So I think the good news is that the tide does seem to be starting to turn. At least, we're kind of taking the first baby steps, but and then of course there's also the Diverse Left incubator. So I like to think that we're starting to correct, the ship a little bit. But I do agree for sure at this moment in time, definitely there's not enough diversity on LeftTube, and definitely there's not enough discussion of praxis. So I don't know. I agree with that spicy ass take.
Yeah, I would mostly agree. I'd also say that when you look at like the larger BreadTubers, like the big three, or the big three that most applies to are Sean, H-Bomb, and Contra. All three of them got started primarily like from like Gamergate and refuting Gamergate and associated movements online, and was based on like a critique of those things. And from there, have not necessarily moved forward from, oh, this is a dominant piece of culture online, to, oh, this has waned a little bit, let's build something up rather than tearing down the existing structures that exist. And I think that's I don't know if I'd critique the individual people for being responsible for that, but I
definitely not.
Yeah,
it's not their fault. I would definitely say it's not Sean's fault. It's not H-Bomber guy's fault, and it's definitely not ContraPoint's fault. In fact, actually, I think ContraPoint was the one that said, let's make BreadTube or LeftTube less of a country club. That's what she said.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, and I like to think I'm seeing signs that we are starting to move the dial on that. So time will tell, but I do. Well, not just time. That sounded very defeatist, but no, we will tell. We can change things, and I hope that we are. Sarah Sunflower, Chris brought on some spice. How are you going to follow that one up?
Yeah, it's basically kind of piggybacking off that one, but kind of in a more specific thing. So with most of LeftTube being really bougie, but also with like left Twitter and online leftism in general, nobody knows what the fuck they're talking about outside of like an urban mindset, because so many people just live in cities. And like having grown up in like rural ass backwoods Appalachia, like nobody knows. Like I didn't know what the fuck a DSA caucus was until I was on Twitter. Like people are just like, oh, go to your local leftist meeting. It's like I can drive 2.5 hours to Asheville every weekend, but that's not feasible. Like that. Right. And even people are just like, oh, just like in your workplace, talk about unionizing. It's like, do you know how quickly you'll get punched in the teeth for mentioning the word union? Like genuinely, it nobody knows what the fuck they're talking about. They really don't. And then people who like are in rural areas will be like, hey, can we talk more about rural organizing? And they'll be like, well, why don't you do that? And it's like, because I don't have the capital that you guys have. Like, you are the ones with the platform, and no one with the platform talks about anything outside of the context of what they know. And considering one of the big, pillars of BreadTube is education, like I kind of figured that people would learn about those things in order to platform ideas that they don't specifically deal with, but no one does. Yeah. And like, I personally, like, due to like disability and stuff, like can't organize personally very much at all. So I don't know this stuff myself. So I'm one of the people who like can't put in that work of, talking about the stuff that I don't have a personal experience with. And it's just so frustrating watching people respond to people being like, hey, can you please talk about this thing, with the people going, well, you do that. It's like, there's a reason they're asking you to. And yeah, it's just annoying.
There's also like a lot of similar difficulties in terms of like, oh, go organize IRL, or oh, go do this thing IRL for disabled people on like online organizing is like a space where I think if you have a disability and you're interested in activism, you're going to be spending a disproportionate amount of time doing that because that's what like you're able to do. But like a lot of obviously we need to organize IRL, right? But some of the critiques I see of like online activism aren't necessarily tailored in a way that recognizes the validity of like educating people and organizing online as well, which is for some people like a necessity. If you live in a rural area, like some of the people here do, and you have no IRL options, or if you live like in an urban area but you can't access any of the IRL options.
I would say like go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I would like to see like a video that basically talks about what you can do online for organizing, like some kind of video for that.
Yeah. No, because the thing about it is we have this amazing technology of the internet, which like, imagine take your pick, what Kropotkin or Lenin or Ho Chi Minh would have been able to do if they had the internet. You know what I mean? Like, imagine how that could have freed them up to do so many things that they just weren't able to do in their times. So I think it's a very powerful tool, and people kind of dismiss it a lot just because it doesn't get used to its greatest effect most of the time, but that doesn't mean it can't be incredibly effective. It's a mass broadcast platform that everybody basically carries around in their pocket. So I think it can't be understated how effective it can be. But also, like, we also tend to lose track of the whole from each according to their ability to each according to their need. To me, it all goes back to that line, and I think it's very important that we remember that. Everybody has different resources in terms of what they are or are not able to contribute, and we just need to be completely respectful of that.
Like, adding to the BreadTube critique that was had, we should be able to critique BreadTube people, because in all the most recent controversies, it doesn't go that way. When you try to critique, you just get like slammed for cancel culture, and it really, really does harm when there's something valid that needs critiqued.
So you said that you were in the military for a while. I grew up as a Navy brat, and I can say my experience with the military people that I knew is that they're pretty conservative and pretty anti-left. Did that have any influence on your worldview?
So you do meet a pretty fair amount of conservative people, at least now, like when I was in a few years back. But at the same time, there were also a lot of like progressive people. Like there was a conscientious objector vegan in my platoon in basic training. There were staunch avid leftists in my unit. And like, surprisingly, when I came out a couple years after the military and told everyone I'm trans, the only people who didn't disown me are all my military brat families. So like, even some of them being conservative, they still wouldn't turn someone away that they cared about for it. So like, I have a really hard time backing up the military is still super conservative. I know that it used to be, and I know there are a lot of loud conservative members of the military, but I don't think it actually makes up the bigger overall like we think.
Oh yeah, and I mean, I was growing up on Navy bases like 20 years ago, so it's probably, I'm sure it does feel like it's been changing, and I think the military people are in a lot of situations exactly like your story. Come from very oppressed, vulnerable backgrounds, and that's exactly why they get recruited. And it's that lure of money and security that brings a lot of deeply oppressed people into the military. So
just that take, you might be my favorite BreadTuber now. I get into so many purity arguments because someone comes in and starts talking about how all the military are bastards and they're bourgeoisie, and I'm like, no, they're a bunch of brainwashed idiots because the military recruits from poverty, brainwashes you in basic training, and then makes you think that you're doing your patriotic duty to go and like threaten brown people.
And like, I mean, I almost joined the military like 4 times, I think. So I fortunately didn't fall into it, but almost did. Okay, so Crystal, here's a really interesting story you have where you were like wanting to be a cop.
Yeah.
Which is in many ways similar to the whole military thing. Although one thing about being a cop is that you don't have quite the same lure of stability. Do you? Like, what was it that was appealing to you about becoming a police officer, and how did you end up coming out so far to the left?
Well, my mom was an EMT, my dad was a firefighter. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of just expecting.
You wanted to make it the holy trinity.
Make the trifecta. And that was a joke I made for a long time, that I was completing a trifecta. So I was just raised in a very pro-police household, and we were white, middle-class, rural Americans. So my story is actually very different from Izzy's in that respect. So yeah.
You were in the police. What would you call it? The like a cadet program, right?
It's called Law Enforcement Explorers.
Okay.
How
did that go?
I regret it now, but at the time it was something to look forward to on a Monday night.
Did you bust any perps? Did you make any arrests?
I did go on some ride-alongs, and we did do one arrest. We served a warrant.
Right.
So I guess I didn't arrest myself, but there was an arrest in my presence.
Well, I mean, how have your views on law enforcement evolved since that experience?
Well, ACAB, first of all.
Right. Let's jump right in. Yes.
No, but like I left criminal justice school to become a full-time security officer, thinking that would lead me still on the path to becoming a police officer. And then the company was really poorly managed, and like I saw how much poverty other guards were living in and how I wasn't making that much money. And like that kind of, and then I also saw that like the people that I was like harassing were just normal people trying to get by. Right, they weren't like criminals. Well, I guess technically they were, but you get what I'm saying.
Right.
So that kind of like, these people aren't bad people. They're just doing what they need to do to survive. Like they need baby clothes, they need food from the store, whatever.
Right.
So over time, that kind of radicalized me, and it took a long time, even after I started considering myself a leftist, to become anti-police, because like it was so ingrained into me that it was so hard to let go of.